Welcome to our interview series on Brave Feminine Leadership. I'm excited today to be joined by Sarah Harden. Sarah's the CEO of Hello Sunshine. If you don't know who Hello Sunshine is, then stop this video immediately. Go and check them out, find them on Instagram or wherever you find them. They're absolutely amazing. And Sarah, together with the founder, Reese Witherspoon, this is a media brand that's anchored in storytelling, and they're on a mission to change the narrative for women. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. Prior to Hello Sunshine, Sarah was the president of Otter Media, which is a joint venture between AT&T and the Chernin Group. She was based in Hong Kong as the Group Director of News Corp Asia. She was Senior Vice President of Business Development at Fox Network. She started a career at Boston Consulting Group. She graduated from Harvard Business School as a Baker Scholar. I really need to ask what that means, Sarah. And she's also got 3 gorgeous kids and a large extended family. So look, Sarah, my first question before we kick off is, you don't appear to have packed much into your life yet. I'm just wondering when you're going to put the foot down and really take off.
Thanks for that, Melissa. You forgot the most important part. I'm a Geelong girl.
She's a Geelong girl.
Girl from Geelong.
Fantastic. So, Sarah, before we jump into too much, for people who haven't had the chance to come across you before, would you share with the audience a little bit about who you are and what drives you and your passions?
Well, it's interesting because I think the work that I'm doing really reflects my passions, which is one of the greatest joys about my job. And it's interesting, it sort of reflects a set of intentional choices over the last 20 years, although I'm always really surprised to be like, oh, wow, I've ended up here. And, you know, I think growing up, as I did, I grew up in Geelong, and I was always curious about media and entertainment. At first I thought I wanted to be a journalist. I was a huge reader. Like I really remember those days of like asking my mum to take me to the Geelong library and getting out like 20 books at a time, and many car trips. I could read in the car, which was great. I would just read. And that's, I'm a big reader. You still read an
enormous amount, don't you?
Well, it's one of the best parts about my job. My books sit at the center of our company. So, but you know, I always had this aspiration to work internationally, but I didn't know what that was about. And I really thought I wanted to be a foreign correspondent. And so I think to be here, I left Australia in 1997 for business school, and I was really excited to broaden my business knowledge. I felt like I had done a Bachelor of Arts in East European Politics at Melbourne Uni out of school, and I sort of worked in consulting. I was like a random hire at Boston Consulting Group out of undergrad. And so I came here for a couple of years, and I was really excited about it. And then I do remember I was very focused when I was at school. I was so curious about the intersection of entertainment and technology. It was sort of the boom of the .com era. And then I decided I wanted to work in that intersection. It was close to consumers and, reflected. I grew up like so many people. I loved TV and movies and books, but I didn't really think there was a role for me.
What did it look like back then? That's a while ago now, and it's sort of it's fantastic to have almost had that vision of where it's gone, and it's become such an enormous thing. But what did it look like back then?
Well, first, other than Skippy, it was like a lot of American TV shows. So I fell in love with America then. Do you know what? It was like my first, I really do remember, I was pretty focused. I loved Yana Venn. She was a bit of an idol. I wrote her a letter when I was like 13, 14, and she was, and I saw this, so 60 Minutes was really influential. Hey Hat Saturday on a Saturday night. These are the shows that I love, but I honestly didn't see it as I didn't see it as a career possibility. I really didn't. Journalism I did, and I was a good writer because I read a lot. And so I thought, well, maybe there's something there. But I was curious about business. I had 2 parents who were very entrepreneurial in their own way, and my mum had been an intensive care nurse at Geelong Hospital, and my parents divorced when I was reasonably young. And I think partly my mum had to go back to work, and she went and worked with one of 7 children with one of her brothers and built a commercial real estate practice. And I watched her do that in my teenage years. And then my dad was a property developer and built properties in regional Victoria office buildings. And so he was an entrepreneurial person. And so there was a lot of sort of discussion about business around our tables. And my mum was also very transparent about like money, and she shared her family about our budget with my two brothers and I. And when we would be like, why can't we go on vacation? Like, you know, she was really like, and so there was this like curiosity about business that, you know, our family friends had a store that I used to work in, you know, from when I was like 15, 16 and my summers, we always worked on our summer holidays. I think my mum was working, and so I was really curious about that, but I didn't see. But I do look back and say, gosh, a lot of that sort of came together when I went to business school. I mean, it was a little terrifying. I remember turning up to Boston with sort of 2 suitcases and total imposter syndrome.
Did you know anyone?
I knew of one of the other Australians in my class. We had a mutual friend, but I didn't know anyone. And I do remember that and feeling that, like, you know, I'd done pretty well in school, but I was like, is my education going to really match up when I'm meeting, you know, my class of 800 people from, 50 countries or whatever, you know, am I sort of like, I did okay for going to school in Australia or working in Australia, but not going to match up on a world stage. And so it was just that was an incredible experience. I think the speakers on campus, the exposure, the people, the diversity of experiences. I mean, it was life-changing, honestly. And so I think from then, I mean, I really have since then I did a startup out of business school. I didn't move back to Australia. I didn't go back to my consulting firm. I thought, if I don't, may as well stay here and work for a couple of years, and I could do it under my visa. And I've never lived back in Australia. I have a house outside Geelong where it's an important home base for me, but I've been living and working here, you know, for the last 23 years, I guess now. Wow, that's a lot.
Wow.
And you know, it's taken me. I've lived in Hong Kong as part of that. So that really is like. But all of those I've been since then, since graduating from business school, doing that startup. You know, I have been working in different roles at the intersection of entertainment and technology and consumers.
So straight off the bat, you know, I know people are going to be watching this, Sarah, and they're going to think I could never do what Sarah does. You know, I could never be like Sarah, you know, take the risks or put myself out there like that or any of those sorts of things. So how would you respond to that kind of thought that probably people watching this right now are having?
You know, it's interesting. I'll take a slight diversion and I will answer your question. I remember, you know, 5-7 years ago running Otter, we had a company full screen, and I remember the CEO, George, said, look, we bought another company, and it was probably 300 or 400 people. And he said, you know what, this company that we bought, it was a young workforce. And he said, we've got all these women who are like either pregnant or first child, and there's like a cohort of them, and they want to see if you'll have lunch with them. I think my third child was probably 4 or something like that. My children, and you know, I had 3 children. And I was like, of course I will. And I remember, I was like, what do they want to talk to me about? Like, literally. And so we had this lunch, and it started a series of these lunches. And one of them asked me a question that was around this, which is a version of like, how do you do it all? Like, how do you have this high-powered job and be focused on your work, and you've got 3 kids, and you've got a husband and friends, and you're involved in the community, and like, how do you not judge yourself? And I'm like, look, and it's sort of a version of how I'd answer this question. And I remember in that lunch giving this answer, and it's something I've really gone back to, which was, I think when you look at something, it's very tempting to zone in on where someone is right at that moment in time. You zone in on motherhood on a certain day and think, I'm a terrible mother, because you're being a great employee that day. Yeah. You've got a meeting that runs late, you don't put your kids to bed. You look out on the course of a week and you're like, I was a pretty good mum, and I was a pretty good employee, and I wasn't a bad wife, Or maybe you've actually had a really busy week at work and you've said, I knocked it out of the park in my job, but I need to spend some more time with my kids. You look out in the course of a month and you're like, gosh, I'm doing a pretty great job. And look out the course of a year. And, I think so much we judge ourselves actually on a given day. And then we look at careers like mine and you look, oh, wow. And you just got to widen your aperture. We have to widen our aperture in the way we look at things. I look at where I am and I'm like, I'll turn 50 next year. I live in LA. Like, I never thought I would be in LA. My business partner and woman I respect so much and so deeply is Reese Witherspoon. I grew up watching her, right? And
we all.
And I've got this company that I feel so blessed to lead, these incredible colleagues. It's a very collaborative leadership team. I'm like, how the hell did I get here?
Yeah.
But it has been a series of steps. If you widen your aperture over 24 years. And so the temptation is to look at one thing and say, I could never do that. Yes, you could. If you'd taken that series of steps in the way that I had, or some similar series of steps. And and I think when we look at that and we judge ourselves and we judge others, is taking a real step back and looking at all of it. And it's not just our work lives, it is our home lives, it is our, are we good friends? Are we good community members? Are we being a good mother and parents? Am I being a good partner to my husband? All of those are deeply important to me. And I really try and remember that. And I actually try and remember when I'm judging myself about any of those things. Some days I'm a good employee, or some days I'm a good employer and CEO.
Yeah.
Some days I'm a great mom, and just some days you cannot be you cannot be good at all the 4 or 5 aspects of your life. You can't nail it every day. You just can't. And we've got to cut out. I know that wasn't entirely your question, but
yeah.
But it is about that. It's like we've got to widen our aperture when we look at others. And, you hear so many stories of overnight successes who are overnight successes when they're 55. We have to take a step back, I think. And I sort of also, I get really annoyed about the sort of the myth of the, whether the myth of the overnight success. And it doesn't... It doesn't respect often the decades of quiet work that goes into anything you want to do. Raising kids is the biggest of them.
I love the advice in terms of just take the pressure off yourself to be able to be everything every single day or every single moment. I think that's such a great way of looking at it.
Yes, this whole notion of having it all. I'm like, nah, no.
I'm puzzled by the fact that we've still got such a gender gap. I know diversity is really broad, and there are so many areas that we do need to and we should focus on. I am focusing on gender in these conversations, and a theme that keeps coming up is around things like gender gap. Some of the early answers were things like, well, girls pull out of science and maths too early, and those are the careers that often lead to the higher paying roles and those sorts of things. So, I've asked some questions around that. But the thing that keeps bouncing back to me is that it's less about that and more about the fact that women don't ask. So, guys are 40% more likely to ask for raises. And when women do, the research is saying they ask for 30% less. I just kind of want to dig in to what might sit behind that, or any of your thoughts around any of that.
The narrative around this strikes me. It's another version of victim blaming, right? I am Australian, but I will try not to swear.
Feel free.
I think the issues are so systemically rooted. And so we have to interrogate all of the systems around how we are where we are. And they're ultimate systems around power and who has power, who gets power. And we've got systems that are rooted in structural patriarchy, basically. And so there are certainly, when you look at the habits of women around pay equity, for example, some of those happen because you've had decades of being conditioned, of being asked and said no, or of being asked, of asking and being fired, or of asking and not getting the job. It is unsafe for many women to ask for what they deserve and should get, and for ask for equal treatment. It is being unsafe. And so when we look at this, when we look at any of these topics, and one of the reasons the data is so hard to change, and look, I'm so hopeful because of, I've been very involved in the Time's Up movement here, and having lived and worked for 20 years, there's more hope in the last 5 years than I have seen, because I think our eyes are being peeled back, and we really are challenging systemic structures around how we, and in the workplace, how we recruit, retain, deal with not just systemic issues, but then just the sets of unconscious biases that we all come to the workplace for, of why is she asking for it? She should be grateful she has a job. She's probably gonna get pregnant in the next couple of years and then leave. Yeah. So it's a good, she's lucky we hired her. I mean, seriously, we've all lived through this in a workplace. And so I really have a problem when we have been operating these systems, and it's like, if only women would do better, if only women would be more vocal, if only people of colour would be more vocal, if only this and that would happen, then it would solve everything. I just call bullshit on the whole lot of it. And so it is part of the conversation for women to understand the conditioning of the decades of this, and how we advocate for ourselves in ways that are going to be more successful and effective. But we're advocating for ourselves in a system which those strategies have not been effective. And so it's equally as important that we train men and women in positions of power to sort of recognize the structural dynamics and issues in that. Look, it's really interesting in California, having gone through, 12 months ago, I've been focused on pay equity really visibly for the last 10 years of my career, very conscious of it, making sure. In California, probably 18 months ago, it became illegal for you to ask to ask anyone what their prior salary was. So,
oh, wow.
And the reason of that is because women have been structurally underpaid. It's a terrible benchmark, because then you have a salary negotiation with someone. So you ask now, it took a little conditioning, because you'd say, where are you at now and where do you want to be?
Yeah.
Right. So it perpetuates pay inequity. It's actually been really interesting to see. And I've had to shift, instead of it's illegal to ask. We do not ask. What we say is what's your target salary? What's your experience set? You talk us through that. And just a simple issue like that, that's a legal reform. I think that law in California is going to do more. I mean, it's certainly, I think, a big step in advancing pay equity for people who have been systemically underpaid. And all of these stats are terrible for women. They're not good for women. They are even more terrible for other marginalised groups, particularly people of colour.
Sarah, you shared a story with me that, I think some people might find really interesting. And it was to do with a point in time. We talk about sometimes women self-reject. So they don't put themselves forward for an opportunity because they kind of talk themselves out of it beforehand. And you shared a story with me about a time that you sort of sat back and waited potentially around an opportunity. Can you recall that, firstly, what I was talking about? And what kind of went on in that space for you at that point?
Look, it's happened to me a couple of times, when a couple of different points in my career, and in the last 10 years, where it's happened twice, where I have been, when I've seen on the horizon that there's a senior role was coming up, and I thought, well, I could be a candidate for that. Working with people who know me well, have been good advocates in my career, and being in that position of saying, if they thought I was right for that, they would come to me. They actually know me. They're good heart. I know they have my interests at heart, actually.
Yeah.
And they would tap me on the shoulder if they thought I was right for this. And I'm in a pretty good place right now. And on one of these roles, it got filled by someone. It turned out to be a disaster. Mm. And I remember saying to my boss at the time, like, why, like the feeling really hurt, and basically saying, I don't understand why you didn't come to me. And this boss being confounded, saying, what are you talking about? You were so aware we were doing this. Why the hell didn't you put up your hand?
Yeah.
Right? And it was a bit of a left of a, it would have been a bit of a left of a center move for me. And their assumption was, she's just not interested. She's doing great where she is. And so, and it was, I mean, it was a great example for me of being, oh my God, you have to have, and all the conditions in this were actually pretty good. It wasn't like I was being overlooked or marginalized by someone. It was actually someone who genuinely has got my interests at heart and has been an incredible advocate for me in other situations. And, you know, but it was a good lesson to me, which was, I think that was some gender playing a role. Certainly if you look at the data, if I had, there is more of a willingness for men to put themselves up, but of having more agency in the way I advocate for myself in my career. And with the full knowledge, you know, I am not you know, I know who I am.
Yeah.
And, but that was a really good lesson for me. And I really regret it. I really regret the way I handled that.
Well, that incredible leader who was a strong advocate of yours just wasn't a mind reader, right?
Well, I knew, look, I obviously had that. I said, you know, you should have come to me. That wasn't just my responsibility to throw my hand up. But at the end of the day, you know, we're working in systems, even well-intentioned people, you know, you have to take, that's where you sort of have to take the responsibility of self-advocacy and agency, I think, in a workplace.
So tell me about Hello Sunshine, and tell me about, you know, I know you're building a really intentional culture, and, you know, there's a lot of deliberate things you're doing in the way that the company's being built, but talk to me about that, and talk to me, you know, as you said, your dream of, can't believe you're working with Reese and you're in LA and you're doing what you're doing. How did that all come about, Sarah?
Yeah, well, I do think, like, the work I'm doing now is it's interesting to look back and say it sort of is a culmination. And I think when I first sat with Reese, which was probably nearly 5 years ago, and it was, you know, Hello Sunshine was a pretty fully formed idea for her. And she was, but, you know, no employees. You know, Reese had a very successful career as a producer and obviously a decades-long career as an actress. And frustrated by the lack of opportunities as an actress to play like complex female protagonists, and the experience of going to Hollywood studios and them saying, oh, we've got our one movie with a woman at the center, like, and also a lover of books. And so she'd come off Gone Girl and Wild and books she had optioned herself and produced as TV shows. And so, and I had been building sort of next generation media brands. And so when I first met, and we were clear we were going to do this together, it really was that feeling, wow, I've sort of been preparing my whole life for this, just in terms of the skills and also something I could not do without Reese. And so, you know, Hello Sunshine, we're a media brand and a media company with a mission-driven company focused on changing the narrative for women. And, you know, we're driven by the belief that storytelling can shift culture, and culture can shift the way we get to walk through the world. And so, you know, we've got a premium content side of our business. So we're in the scripted shows like Big Little Lies and Morning Show, or Morning Was in Australian. Little Fires Everywhere. We're in production this year on From Scratch, another book by Tembi Locke for Netflix, Daisy Jones and the Sixth, in the back half of the year.
I love that book.
Yeah, really wonderful. Taylor Jenkins Reid, I mean, she's an amazing author. In fact, her Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo is one of my favorite books and has got a huge resurgence right now. All my friends are reading it. And books sit at the center of what we do as well. So we are a studio and production company, and our content sides of the business. We have an unscripted division, so reality TV, and we have a kids and animated division, focusing on sort of changing the narrative for girls. And then we have a direct-to-consumer content and commerce part of our company. And I think how we're building the company, I think, reflects when we started out 4.5 years ago was, how do we build a media company that's architected for the next 20 years of media, not the last 20, and a belief that we thought it was important to be in conversation with audiences and then to bring those audiences to whatever else we're doing. So Reese's Book Club was the starting point of that, and it was just a curatorial voice for our brand. Reese picks a book in the first week of every month, and we promoted it on Instagram. And, I think we have become the most influential social book club, or the most influential book club in media. We launched a direct-to-consumer app last week, which was actually a big deal for us, and with a couple of million members. And, Reese, she looks to really elevate authors, often debut authors, although not always. And all of our books have a woman driving the story. And, we then adapt some of those for film and television, and then we have a brand partnerships team and a social and editorial team. So, I think when you put all that together, I think building a brand that gives us the ability to bring, we sort of say, earn our way into the attention of women across the world with premium stories, whether that's told in a podcast form. We've also produced podcasts, or in a feature film, in a theatre, or in a television series on a streaming platform, or directly on, our YouTube channel. We're telling storytelling.
There's a really strong why behind the company then, isn't there? Yeah. Passion.
Absolutely. And I think it reflected what we thought was a white space. Look, this is such a crowded media landscape. At some level, you look back 5 years ago and say, we were idiots starting an entertainment media company. But we saw this white space together. And the white space is, if you have decades of the way stories are built, where you have the voices of women and people of color and LGBTQIA people left out, structurally marginalized from storytelling, whether you look at the percentage of directors, whether you look at green light committees, whether you look at but yet the makeup of those people absolutely reflect the audiences. You have gaps in people not seeing their experiences reflected on screen. That's a gap. So, and it sounds crazy, but I'd never forget talking to Reese, with Big Little Lies, the story about 5 women and their friendship and the complexities of female friendship. Reese is like, this is the first time I've been on a call sheet with 4 other actresses. I'm like, what are you talking about? You've been making movies for 20 years. She went back through all of them. No. Single female lead that's crazy to me.
Crazy, yeah.
Crazy. And then you look at Big Little Lies as a huge hit, and you wonder why, and you think, oh my God, women. And by the way, it's a little bit crazy because Big Little Lies actually shot, the school in Big Little Lies is my kids' elementary school, which is a mile from my house. So not only does it feel like real life, I'm like, it really does
feel like real life.
It really does feel like real life. Because it's literally right down my street. But you see women reflecting this the school mum experience. There's something in that they can take away from it, or whether it's Little Fires Everywhere, and the experiences reflect the complexities of motherhood and race and identity and who gets to become a mother, and those themes that it explores. It's just a giant white space. So that's what we saw. We saw a business opportunity, which is when you leave people out. And so I think the job is not only, we talk about, it's not just what we do in making storytelling, but it's how we do it. And so, building a company which the diverse makeup of our company, a set of culture and values, we are also driven by the fact that in a crowded marketplace, if your content is going to resonate with audiences, if they're going to see something of themselves reflected in it, you must make that storytelling authentically. And so when you look at the makeup of a writer's room for us, or if you think of the books or the stories we choose to tell, who's in our employee base, who's in our boardroom, we talk about building an authentically stacked company based on our mission and what we're putting out into the world. And again, we saw a gap. I think then a year or two after we started the company, you had the Me Too and Time's Up movements, which I think has certainly didn't change our mission, but it certainly accelerated it, and I think has brought a higher level of consciousness. And then obviously with Black Lives Matter as well, about the systemic racism and systemic exclusion that you have had from groups from all aspects of our lives, and including our entertainment and media companies.
How have you shaped, because you talk a lot about the culture being an intentional culture, what does that mean? And when you say it, are you rejecting other cultures you've seen, or, what's that about?
Well, look, I certainly remember in the first few months of Hello Sunshine, I think the experience I'd had prior to that at Otter, where we helped foster and build and grow multiple and under Otter 4 companies that were early stage companies. The experience is, look, you're setting culture in a company from day one in everything you do. You're sending signals of who belongs here and what we're about and what behaviors are acceptable and what's expected and what's tolerated. And you can either do that accidentally or you can do it intentionally. And we're in a really competitive marketplace to hire world-class talent. And if you're an early stage company, you're not going and paying the biggest salaries. And you have to convince incredible people to come on a ride with you. In some cases, to move away from more financially secure roles. And so I think you've got to be very clear about what you stand for. I also think for us, we put a woman, our mission is to put a woman at the center of every narrative we champion, and embedded in that is elevating diverse and authentic voices. And so it's like embedded in our mission. So look, I think what it looked like was, as you get building and you start to have, and it's humbling. It's humbling hiring and managing people. Like, it is so hard. And so, I think early on, it's like, we've got a company that empowers women. I remember early having to really, I think with young early stage employees, might have been their first or second jobs. It doesn't mean you get to do whatever you want to do. If you have a good idea to make a podcast, it doesn't mean we're going to do it. Like, we've got to be selective and thoughtful, like a lot of those things. So, but what it looked like early on, so we really defined our values early on with our team, very specific around, we have 5 values. We wrote them in the form of actually a children's picture book. I've just got my values book somewhere right here, actually, at my desk at home. So, our mission drives us in everything we do. We're world-class DIYers. We're humans who show up. We are an excellence machine. And so we talked about what those meant to us, the tension between them. We talk about our values. They're embedded in everything we do. We look at everything through that. We have been doing, since we're 10 people, I brought in an external leadership and culture development person to work with us, who works, and she spends 2 days a month with the company. And that was a real investment early on. And it's everything from helping our mid-level leaders develop leadership capacity, because many of them are first-time leaders, and our company is fast growing. So it is teamwork. It's putting in place practices for how we work together. So we have different practices in our company. We have check-ins at the start of meetings. But it's also a language around how we talk. And so I think it's about being, I think for us, very clear about who we are and about how that relates to our source of advantage as a company. Like, DIYer is one. We sort of talk about, like, we can pitch $100 million TV shows, and we also unstack the dishwasher. It's kind of a very Australian egalitarian, but it's like, when it's no big egos, no asshole. No, it's a version of that, right? It's like but also you've got to preserve a startup's resources. We're not going to waste money on stupid things. We fly coach. Like, they're important signaling. They're important signaling things around.
And that includes you too,
resources.
Sarah, I assume. So when you say
absolutely,
right through, yeah.
Yeah. And, there are definitely times when we're like, really? You're all kind of red eye. You're like,
who made this?
But that was important. And it's important and look, as we get bigger and we might change some of those and say it's not as important for us anymore. And actually, but I think, and then your employees are always looking about, are you internally consistent? So it's not about just pasting them on a wall, but we hold ourselves accountable to those. Whether it's engagement, we do engagement surveys around how we're living up to them. We have open forums and discussions. And look, there is always work to be done. We can always do better and be better.
Can I ask, how do you protect against the situation you spoke about earlier, where, as your company grows, you're growing quickly, you've obviously got a lot of opportunities, and there's a lot of opportunities for people to put their hands up and take on new roles. How do you kind of protect against those situations where, there could be people sitting in the organisation who are self-rejecting before they even get there?
I think I think one of the things we're looking to do is, and it gets back to sort of values and culture, is create, it's funny. I literally we've been having a conversation as executive team about diversity and inclusion this morning. And so I actually I've had this definition next to my desk for about a year, but it's we talk about what does it mean to be a truly inclusive company. And, inclusion is about safety in a lot of areas, but this definition by Valerie Williams, who's an amazing diversity inclusion consultant who's been working with the company, the intentional creation of conditions where everyone is valued and belongs, so we can leverage the power of differences. That's her inclusion definition. I love it. And you talk about a condition where everyone is valued and belongs. That's a condition of psychological safety. I think when you look at everything about all of this research about the effectiveness of teams and the effectiveness of high-performance cultures, so much of it comes down to creating psychological safety. So what does that mean? Expectations are clear.
Yeah.
It's transparent about how and who you get promoted, how you advance in an organisation. You have a clear culture of feedback and performance assessment. You have the ability to safely raise issues when they arise. And safety is a really big one for employees. We are constantly interrogating that.
Yeah.
And, we're 60, 70 people. You have pockets of the company where we have an issue here. Like, what are we doing about it? How do we tackle it? We as team and managers are all working to become better leaders too. So how do you have a culture that supports a growth mindset, that has a lot of expectations about what's expected of leaders, but also gives them this, it's like accountability for that, but then the support and scaffolding to actually become better leaders. None of us are perfect or fully formed. We are all works in process. And I think that's the hard work of leadership, is judging. It's the hard work of terminating people who are not exhibiting issues consistent with your culture, which is, what's behavior that gives rise to a termination, and what is someone who needs more coaching and support, and when and where do you draw those lines?
Yeah. You have I just looked earlier at your Instagram, and on there you've got, I think it's Do More, Be Better, and you've got one that I really loved, which was Learn and Unlearn.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell me about that as a kind of anchor or a statement.
I mean, look, it's funny, the whole do more, be better, and it's kind of more action, less talk is a bit of the ethos of Hello Sunshine. I think when we started the company, we had to put our heads down and, we've got such a worthy mission. At the end of the day, it's a competitive marketplace. We can talk all we like about how unjust it is that, well, not unjust, it's how wrong it is that you've had people. The way to change it is to be part of the solution. And we were and it's part of the pressure of it I do feel the weight of it sometimes of, we've got to go out, and part of our strategy too, we have to go and execute with excellence, because success breeds more success. It means it's more people we can hire, it's more jobs we can create, it's more stories we can amplify. And so I think part of that is just doing the work, and we are really focused on, like, we can talk all we want, you have to do the work. We have to do it with a level of intention, a level of excellence. Like, I cannot tell you the caliber of the 60 people that work in this company. It is insane.
How exciting.
And, the biggest job of a CEO and with the founder Reese is the condition setting, to bring people in to do the best work of their lives, but not just bring in people who have always been A+, right? You bring in people who are early in their careers, and you help create the conditions where they really can find their power. And look, I think the learning and unlearning, I am very mindful. I've grown up in an enormous privilege. While I'm a woman, I'm a white woman. Incredible education. I actually, it was a privilege to grow up in a small town in Australia with an amazing family.
Yeah.
And, I think if anything has shown me over the last 10 or 15 years, I've certainly been subject to biases. And, we've been working, in male-dominated environments and often the only woman in the room. Like, there has been that. But I think if the eye-opening and the self-education that I think is incumbent on all of us, but particularly, we want to be part of, like, positive change in this country, is just unlearning the systemic, the systemic practices, the systemic racism that is we have lived in and been part of. And that's the unlearning. It is acknowledging that no matter what good intentions we have, we've grown up in a systemically racist culture and systemically biased structural institutions that have located power in favor of certain groups. And I think if we want to be part of, being part of moving towards a sort of more just and equitable world that truly includes everyone, we have to be prepared to interrogate those power systems, including the ones that have benefited us along the way.
Yeah. Sarah, you talk about creating an environment for your team to find their power. How did you find your power? What role models did you see, or did you?
Well, so many. It's interesting. I'm still so much on the journey. I feel like it's funny. I always, sometimes when I have to, you know me well enough to know I do find it a little bit excruciating to talk about myself. I really, I do feel, as I grew up, my mom was incredibly formative. My family were incredibly formative for me. And, I looked at my mom as she raised my brothers and I, and, she's an incredibly bright woman, and, 7 or 6 siblings. She became a nurse because that was sort of what she did in her town. You sort of became a nurse or a teacher or you got married. She was brilliantly smart. She later in life, switched, and she had incredible curiosity, but she died when she was 46 years old. And I feel I had an incredible example in her of just her get up and go and hustle. And, I think a very humbling experience of, I think she did all of those things and was also an incredibly attentive mother. So she's been a real role model. I do feel, I'm a big one for quotes. So I have another quote next to my desk, which was the Dean of Harvard Business School in graduation said, which was, "No success in business will ever make up for a failure at home." Okay. And, and I really think about that a lot as well. Am I being am I being a good mom? What's this all for? So, people I admire, there's women like Michelle Obama, who I really like. She is someone that I have such a deep admiration for, I think. If you haven't read her book, Becoming, you should. And, I really, when I think of her grace, I think of her strength of voice and her quiet work that she has done. And, I think there's people, I deeply admire Reese. I think the joy of getting to work with someone that you so deeply respect, as a creative thinker, as a parent, like she juggles a lot as well. And I look at it and I see how she does that. And she gives me a lot of courage. There's times where you are like, she's really encouraging me to really listen to my own convictions about things, and, knowing I'm working with someone that always really has my back. But I look for sources of inspiration in many places. I will say that in the last 5 years, the really humbling experience of the bravery of the women who came forward in the Me Too and Time's Up movement. Yeah. Like, they've shifted work culture. And then I think the bravery and the courage of activists, I think through Black Lives Matter, all through the voting rights reforms. And you look at Stacey Abrams, who's also, by the way, an incredible author. She writes romance novels, if you haven't read them.
Right.
She's got a new book coming out, actually, I think in May or June. But, and when you look at the on-the-ground voting rights reform in Georgia and what that has meant for the shift in America, like, it's awe-inspiring and deeply inspiring. And, and I think the thing that inspires me about that so much is this is bravery when you have a lot to lose. And there is a lot to gain, but the gains are so systemic and not immediate, and putting themselves often in physical risk, like the toxic nature of social and media and others. It is just, I have so much admiration. So I get a lot of inspiration from, women and men, but, many women that I see around me every day.
I love how, and I think you've always been so humble and open and wanting to learn and curious and interested in other people. And it just absolutely shines out of you. And I've got no doubt there'd be so many people I could speak to who I'd ask the same question around a role model and who they admire, and your name would be right up there on the list. Sarah, you started to, I knew you'd really love that. You started to go there a little bit, but I am asking everyone to just think about, from your perspective, what does brave feminine leadership look like? I know you've started to answer this, but really, what does it look like today, and does it need to change?
There is there's something about standing in our own shoes fully that feels really strong to me. I think it is, I think there is a resoluteness and a strength of women standing shoulder to shoulder. So I don't see brave feminine leadership. I certainly see it expressed individually, but the most powerful thing that I see is cohorts and collaborators and groups of women who are just standing so firmly in their own shoes and standing shoulder to shoulder with other women and saying, this is it. And it's not talking anymore about what we don't want and what the problems are. It is just being clear and saying, we're standing here. This is what it looks like. Follow us. We got it. Like, we got it. And no asking for permission, not begging for a seat or the crumbs or the one spot. fuck that. Like,
Yep.
sorry. I couldn't. I nearly got to the end. But it's just like, we have what we need. We have what we need. Get out of our way or join. I also think it is a very, there's something around the inclusiveness and the collaborative way that I see women leading that doesn't just feel good, but it actually creates more powerful leadership, because you can bring whole groups of people, whole organizations, whole populaces, whole voting blocks with you. And I think that's deeply transformative, I think, for companies, for communities.
I have loved our conversation, and I love what you guys are doing, and I love that the company that you guys are building together. Not only am I absolutely confident it will be, a commercial success, I think even far more importantly, with the stories that you guys are telling and sharing, I just wonder, one day into the future, it's because I don't think we ever questioned the movies we watched before or the stories we saw before. We never questioned them. They just kind of were there and they formed the background we operated in. And I just think how amazing that you guys are creating something so lasting, so tangible, that people are going to just be able to absorb into kind of every pore in their body, and the incredible messages that are in there. And there are a lot of messages in there about women standing shoulder to shoulder, like you're talking about as well. So
thank you.
Sarah, thank you. Always a pleasure. It didn't matter that the swearing came out late. I invited you early on, so you restrained
well, my friend, we have known each other since we were 14 years old.
We have,
and it's such a joy to talk to you. I really appreciate it. So thank you. Loved it.
You too.